This week has felt a bit like a roller coaster ride, with some things not going how I expected, some things not going how I planned, and one or two things not going how I wanted them to. There has been some good news, but there has also been some less good news. And this has had a big impact on the work that I've been able to do and the time that I've had to prepare for a question and answer section later on in this video. First day started a lot later than usual, as I only got back from a long weekend earlier that morning, and I had to catch up on various things off-site to start with. But once I was on-site, I started with my sequence of checks of the concrete from last week, the terrace below, and then inside. And with the house opened up, I then got on with finishing some work from last week. First, cutting some additional rebar pieces. Which I then use for making the last temporary steps a bit more secure. And with the steps ready, I got back to emptying the shed, which in the Q&A section, I will talk about the reason I'm doing this now. And with one part of the shed cleared, I headed out to finish some admin and prep work off-site. The priority for the next day was a meeting with the architects and builder to talk about the next phase of work that I have been waiting to activate. And after opening all the house so we could see all the areas more clearly, I then had a bit of time to work on finishing emptying the shed. And I had managed to move most of the stuff out before the others arrived for the meeting. We ended up having a pretty long discussion, with the key good news being that the builders could start their next phase, which was much quicker than I had thought after recent conversations. And which, subject to agreeing quite a few details, could actually be the start of next week. And then after the meeting, I finished organizing the things that I'd taken out of the shed. which, as you can see, is now pretty much empty. And then I had to head out early again, this time to prepare for a meeting with the council the next morning to talk about the proposal for moving the path. The meeting with the council started early and lasted a bit longer than I had expected, not least because my basic Spanish tends to slow conversations down a bit. For now, anyone that would like a reminder of what my proposal for this path involves, please have a look at video 36, in which I talked about a couple of conditions that the council wanted included in my proposal that specifically relate to this space here and that are going to be very difficult for me to accept. The council had first raised these in February, but it had taken until May for me to be able to get a meeting to discuss them with them. And at the end of that meeting, I had been given the impression that the conditions would not actually be necessary. But after weeks of waiting for an update, I was then told that that might not be the case. And then it took another 6 weeks to be able to get a meeting to find out what was happening. And my summary of that meeting this week is that it probably ended just about as badly as it possibly could, when after talking about a range of offers, options and ideas, there was a relatively continual shaking of the head and a final message that their council's position on the conditions were basically totally unchanged. So I'm now at a little bit of an impasse, and my technical architect, who is my main contact with the council, is going to come back to me with some suggestions about what options I have, which is all very frustrating, especially after waiting what is now basically 8 months. Anyway, after the meeting with the council, I then had another meeting with my builder to discuss the next phase of work in more detail. And then after that meeting, because I had some more admin to do off-site, I wasn't actually able to get back to the house. And in fact, the next day was a lot more of the same, with a lot more discussion about the next phase of work, including a meeting here with the builder to review some of the very specific details. Also that it might be possible to start the next phase of work at the start of next week, when we will begin renovation work on all of the roof, which I will talk about in more detail as the work progresses, but for which the first phase will be all of this side of the house, where upstairs we will be putting in a ring beam, brand new wooden beams, and then the layers on top, all of which will enable us to later on get on with repair work on these walls. But one of the reasons I've come up here is actually to talk about my daily check and experiment that's been happening here, which all started because for a very long time I've wanted to have an outdoor security camera to make sure that the house was a bit safer when I wasn't here. But without an electricity connection, without a Wi-Fi network, I wasn't sure about viable, cost-effective solutions. However, I was contacted by a company called Reolink, and they asked me if I would like to review one of their cameras, specifically the Altas PT Ultra model, which they could provide to me alongside a small solar panel that would be able to provide the ongoing power. Seeing as it was exactly what I wanted, I jumped at the chance. And when I received them, the solar panel here and the camera here were both very easy to set up, especially as I've been able to use the strap that was provided to tie it to this post, although I could in the future use the fixed screw option when I've got a more permanent home for it. And because it's got a memory card slot here and I can connect to it with my mobile phone hotspot, I don't need a permanent Wi-Fi connection, although that would open up a lot more options for me, all of which I could access with the very easy to use Reolink app. But as it is, I've got the camera in this hole and it starts to record as soon as it's activated by any movement, in daylight or at nighttime. And because of a clever lighting option, the nighttime videos are surprisingly clear, and in the daytime the quality is really pretty good. And I particularly like a feature that enables the 10 seconds prior to the movement being detected to be included in the recording. So I've had the camera and the solar panel in place for a few weeks now. And each morning I come up and check whether anything was happening while I was away. And it's fair to say that most of the videos are of occasional cars, cyclists and walkers. Apart from in the very first week when this happened. And since then, I've been waiting for more interesting clips to be able to share with you, which is one of the reasons I've held off talking about the experiment and the checks I've been making. But unfortunately, not that much has been interesting to show, and the few moths, birds, and possibly bats that have flicked by the camera have not really stayed still long enough to be able to be seen very clearly. But it's no fault of the camera, because actually, the few cars that do go past, I get a very clear view of, and I've got a good record of. So anybody that is looking for an outdoor security camera, I'd be very happy to recommend any Reolink camera, especially the Altas PT Ultra. And if you are interested, there are a couple of links in the description below. One for the model that I've got, and one for the general Reolink online store. And now I'm going to head downstairs to answer some questions that a number of you very kindly added to the comment section of last week's video, which has been really useful for me because it's helping to shape my thinking about what I should be sharing in my videos. But by far the most popular topic for the questions relates to my work on the well. So those are the ones I'm going to start with, although for some of them I will be paraphrasing them slightly to keep them concise. Okay, first up, is it actually a cistern, and can it be used for rainwater? I had originally thought that it was a cistern, but I'm now pretty sure that it isn't or wasn't, on the basis that there's never been a clear evidence that it was sealed and that there was a firm base to actually be able to retain water in. And if you look down the hole, like in this clip, after a few meters, the wide rock cavity starts to get narrower and narrower around some brick rings, and then it looks like a hole that is blocked up with earth and rubble that I think would probably have used for lifting water from. I'm not sure how far that final hole may go, but I'm pretty sure it's well above the level of where the water table is now, especially as my borehole over there needed to be 153 meters deep to get a good water supply. And my final and main reason for believing it wasn't a cistern is that the drain there was pointed at the well, and a lot of rainwater over the last few years has gone down there. And not once have I actually seen water settle at the bottom. It all just disappears incredibly rapidly. Now that could be cracks or could be some other fault that's developed over the years, but I'm pretty sure that the cavity at the bottom was never designed to actually retain the water. Okay, next question. Can you convert it to a cistern? This is actually what I would like to have been able to do, but I couldn't find anyone that was particularly keen to do work on it. And the cost of trying to create a base and sealing it was going to be relatively high. And because I actually need to have two separate water stores, one for rainwater collection and one for the water from the borehole to use in the house, I was always going to need to do work building a water store. So I actually decided it was going to be a lot easier just to do work building some water stores in that area there. Okay, next question. Why not use it as a feature? So I definitely considered this option, and I particularly like some of the suggestions that people made for it. But ultimately, the time and cost to try and create it at this stage, when I'm going to be changing the levels of the terrace and some of the complexities of the brickwork beneath the surface, was just going to be a bit too much for me at this stage, so I didn't choose that option. Next one. Why a solid slab and no access? Because there's no water in the well at the moment, and I wasn't going to look at the option of turning it into a cistern. I really didn't think that creating access was necessary at this stage. And for the solid slab, I just wanted to make it as secure and safe as possible for when we move around this area during work in the house. But if you recall, when I did the work, there is in about this section some old concrete pavers, and if I did choose to ever try and create some access, it might be possible to come in from that direction without breaking up too much of this or the brickwork below. Okay, next one. Did you consider other cheaper solutions for the top? One or two people commented on the design that I followed and the cost of the solution, and in truth, the cost of the materials, especially the concrete beams and the brick boards, while it might seem a little bit over-engineered, was not that expensive, probably about 150 euros. And the design I did end up following was one that was recommended to me, whether that was right or wrong. Next one. Why did you use formwork? I had planned on just using formwork on this lower side to stop too much concrete slipping over the edge. But in the end, when we talked about it, we decided we may as well put formwork around the other edges just in case. But it was definitely a precaution that wasn't necessary, and very little concrete went over the edge. And the final question about the well, and by far the most common, why didn't you just fill it in? Well, I did think long and hard about that option, and I was pretty keen to do it, not least for the security aspect. But I decided that it would be an irreversible decision because you'd never be able to get all the material out if you ever wanted to use the space in the cavity in the future. And while I don't want to use it now for that cost, I thought I would leave open the option for me or someone else in 40, 50 years' time, at least to be able to potentially do something with the cavity and maybe turn it into some sort of feature. So that's why I didn't fill it in. Okay, now for some non-well questions. Who owns the church? The church is owned by the Diocese of Girona, which is called the Bisbat, and that is the institution that sold the house to me. Next one. What was the cleaning in the forest a few months ago? There was never any update about that one. Well remembered. That bit of work I did related to the path proposal, and I had spoken to the council about the possibility of creating a space in that little forest corner above the road to create it for cyclists to use and to give them some shade. And I was clearing it at that stage to make sure that what I was offering to the council as an option was actually viable, which I think it is. But that is kind of on hold along with the path proposal and the current position of the council. Next one. Tell us about the languages spoken on the building site. If it's me doing the talking, it'll be in English or Spanglish. And if the builders and architects are talking to me, they will tend to talk in Spanish, but sometimes Catalan among themselves. And then those builders that are from Gambia, they speak a combination of Spanish, Catalan, a couple of them speak English as well, and also 2 or 3 different dialects from Gambia. So it's a bit of a mix. Next one. Do you speak Catalan? I know a few words and I understand a little bit, but I don't really speak Catalan at all yet. How do you plan to heat the house? The plan is for underfloor heating on both levels. And in my original plan for the energy source, I wanted to use a ground source heat pump, although I might use an air source heat pump instead. Next one, how do you insulate the house? Well, at the moment I obviously don't, but the plan is to have pretty thick insulation on the floors and on the roof. But I won't be putting any insulation on the walls, which is a sacrifice I'm going to have to make if I want to retain the natural stone wall facade. What will the house wall exterior look like? Well, it will be pretty similar to the wall behind me, although when I repoint it, the lime mortar will become a lot more prominent, so it'll look a little bit lighter. Do you have a background in house building? No, and I appreciate that it shows quite often. What will you do with all the rubble? Yeah, a key question. For the bigger and better stones, which I and more recently Rex have been putting to one side, I'll be using those to repair the various walls, both on the inside and outside. For the slightly smaller stones that are around, especially in that pile there and further down the pile down there, I'll be using that as a proxy for gravel on various parts of the exterior to build up the layers to make them level. And then, subject to the path proposal and the potential need for some extra ballast and material in certain parts to do that work, I might use some of the stones for that if I ever get it approved. And then finally, if I do have any big stones left over, I might use them for some gabion walls below this top area in a couple of small sections. So there's plenty of options and there's plenty of rock to go around. Next one. Have you and do you consider getting a mini excavator? Yes is the quick and easy answer, although I have been quite happy to do a lot of the digging myself. For the patio area, I didn't use an excavator at all because I didn't want to break anything beneath the surface that I didn't know was there, which did happen when I did some very initial work on some old shed walls over there. And then for the clearing of the floor, to start with, I didn't use a machine because I wanted to be sure about the strength of the walls and how the rock would behave. But if you remember, I did actually have a plan to get some help that was going to come with an excavator. But that didn't happen and it fell through. And in the end, it was just quicker to get on and do the work. And then for the big work outside for the landscaping, I think I'm more likely to get Luis to come back and help me shift stuff very quickly because he's a wizard at it and it's a relatively cost-effective solution. But for some of the other landscaping, I would still consider it and I might hire one at some stage. Are you open to visitors? Yes, and it's very nice to have people visit and to be able to talk to them, although it is slightly more convenient if people contact me in advance and give me a bit of warning. Next one. Why is the well, shed and terrace a priority and not the inside? Well, I think it's fair to say that for the shed more recently, that's been a very short-term priority. It's not a big priority in the scheme of things. And there are various parts to the answer. For the terrace area, I would like to be able to do some of the work in this area, especially where planting trees are involved, because obviously the lead time for getting them how you want them to look is long, and the sooner I can do it, the better. For the well, it was just a case of wanting to have it as secure and safe as possible, as quickly as possible, so that it was a bit easier to use this space when we're working around the house. And then for the shed, the truth is that we can do work at knocking that down and clearing the landscape at any time, potentially when there's some big work going on inside. And therefore I just wanted to get it clean and empty so that I've got that option available at any time going forward. And one more thing to that answer is that it's quite nice just to be able to get outside, especially while the weather is nice, and mix things up a bit. I think if you're working on your own and always doing the same thing for a long period of time, that can be a bit demotivating, so it's nice to mix stuff up. When are you going to do the work on the roof and the walls with the cracks? Well, the work on the roof will start on Monday and the work on the walls to repair them will follow after that, so in 2 or 3 months' time. Do you use project planning, listing tasks and managing your time, or is it scribbled down in a notepad? It's actually a bit of a combination of both. I do have a pretty comprehensive work plan and a schedule, but I've had to re-baseline that plan a lot, especially when there have been external dependencies and when I've been waiting, for instance, for the builders to be available for their next phase. And then for the shorter term work, I do have the equivalent of a backlog list, and I use that on a weekly and bi-weekly basis just to review what work I would do in the coming days and the coming weeks. What is the plan for coming weeks and months? So the plan is for the work on the roof with the builders, and while they are doing that, I will also try and do some work on the floors and some of the repair work on some of the walls. And depending on how I get on, I might also do some work on the exterior while the builders are working on the roof. Next one, and the final one. What timeline do you have in your head for the house? My main goal at the moment is by the end of next year to have all of the structural work on the house completed and all of the core services connected. But obviously I'd like to get as much done in that time as possible, but we'll see how we progress, especially with the roof work. I hope that was helpful for you. It certainly saved me writing very similar answers to lots of very similar questions and comments about the well. And with the Q&A done, that is the end of the week for me, which has been quite influenced by the meeting with the council about the path proposal. And next week I'll be investigating what options I might have for it. But more importantly, I'm very excited about the roof work starting, even if it is going to be a very long process. So please do tune in next week to see how it starts.